This is So Life Wants You Dead, a show that explores the intersection of illness, disability, healing, and creativity. I'm Nora Logan, and this is a podcast on how looking at death helps you live. Today, my guest is writer and producer Carolina Barlow. Carolina is currently a staff writer on the upcoming Will Ferrell series, The Gulf War, for Netflix. Prior to that, she was a producer, writer, and co-host of the Ron Burgundy Podcast, as well as the True Romance Podcast with iHeart Media. She's developing an original project with Apatow Productions and recently developed a project with FX with Lisa Harrison attached to produce. She also co-produced the Netflix documentary Will and Harper and previously worked with Leslye Headland. She's developing FRANKENSTEIN Is a Friend with Will and Mosaic Films. On today's episode, Carolina shares her story of having a life-altering car accident at the age of 28. We talk about her experience with near death, how traumatic experiences can deepen one's empathy, and how useful humor can be to help cope with pain. She also writes a brilliant and hilarious Substack in which she tells the story of her accident, amongst other things, which I reference on the show because I'm such a big fan of it. It's worth checking out. Here's the conversation. Welcome to So Life Wants You Dead, Carolina. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's so exciting to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week.
So before we start, I just want to say that we have this unique shared experience that we knew each other as children.
Yes.
I remember you as, I guess you must have been, the last time I saw you before we got reconnected was, you must have been 7, I would say.
Yeah, I was really young. Yeah.
And I'm a few years older than you. And I then we didn't see each other or speak for like 25 years. And then through a wonderful mutual friend, we got reconnected, our friend Danny.
Yes.
And I just love that because it's this magical way that sometimes happens in life where you just like completely, I never forgot about you because I really loved you and your sister, and had so many fun times with you. But then in this other completely circuitous way, we got reconnected. And I just wanted to say that at the top because it's such a fun way that we know each other.
I know it really is magical. And I loved you. I loved your mother. We spent time in your mother's apartment in London, which was just one of the best trips ever. And I remember, it's so interesting how rare it is for a child to feel comfortable with another adult that isn't their parent. Mm-hmm. And I remember just watching a game show with your mother and just having the best time. And it was just me and her in her London apartment watching TV together. And it just speaks to what a great person she is that I just felt so at home. But yeah, it's so funny because when you're a few years older than someone when you're a kid, it might as well be 10 because they just seem like I just thought you were the most glamorous, coolest girl ever. And that I felt so lucky to be able to hang out. But we had fun.
Oh, that's so nice. I actually completely forgot that you came to London. But now it's all coming back to me. And yeah, it is really funny because I feel so much like we're of the same generation, which we are now. When I speak to you and when I read your work, but at that time, I remember feeling like you were this little kid. And
yes, and you were this. You might as well have been a teenager to me. I just thought you were so cool.
Yeah.
And still do, which is I was so excited to do your podcast.
Yeah, I feel the same way about you. So I wanted to invite you on the show because you were in an accident when you were 28 years old, a car accident. And it was this really serious thing that happened in your young life. Can you tell me a bit about how it happened and that story?
Yes, I also just want to say it's so interesting telling the story now because I feel so there's some distance from it. And I don't know about you in terms of your health crisis, but for me, for so long, it was so hard to tell the story because it felt so near. But yeah, that's just an aspect of healing that doesn't seem like it'll happen for a really long time, and then suddenly it does. But yeah, when I was 20, I was about to turn 28. I was 27, and it was April 12th, I want to say. And I was going on a work trip to Orange County for this political event with my boss. And I had been working with him for 3 years. So we had done hundreds of these work trips. And it was like 11 p.m. And I was, just falling asleep in the back of the car. And I had a weird day. I mean, it's so spooky. I just felt weird. I felt off. And then we got rear-ended. And at first, for the first second, it seemed fine. But I remember the car just jolting. And if you've ever been rear-ended, it always is a shock. But this felt even a bigger shock because we were on the carpool lane on the freeway. And so I just remember looking out the window and suddenly the car was in the air for a second. And we all went, oh, kind of jokingly. And then all of a sudden the car flipped to its left side, and it didn't. The scary part was that would have been bad enough, but the car skidded, so it wouldn't stop moving. And yeah, it was just, it was, thank God you just don't feel pain when you're in that much shock. Because it skidded for a while, and ended up taking some of my, it split my fingers in half. When the car finally stopped, I looked down and my fingers, my middle finger and my index finger were both cut in half, and I was just holding on to them. And it took a part of my shoulder bone. And yeah, just things that you can't comprehend that you went through. And I was just very calm while it was happening. But yeah, I had to kick through a window to get out of the car, and I was stuck for a while, and it took me a while to realize the extent of my injuries. And it was only when I was in the ambulance and I could tell the paramedics were really concerned about my arm that I realized, oh my gosh, I said, am I going to lose my arm? And no one definitively said, no, you're fine.
Oh my
Which
God.
you expect.
Yeah.
And so
you want that in that moment, you want that reassurance. You want someone to be like, yeah, you're keeping it.
Yeah, and it's also an hour ago I was completely healthy and fine and normal. So nothing this extreme can happen this quickly. It just goes against your logic. And I was lucky enough to have the accident really close to a trauma hospital where there were surgeons there working that night. I've had so many doctors say for an unlucky person, you were very lucky. And again, that's something that when your left shoulder is immobilized and you have crazy scars all over your body, you don't ever feel lucky. So even people saying that, you're like, no, that's not, I'm purely unlucky. But again, with time, with distance from the accident, I really do see the luck and just the blessings and how worse it could have gone and all of the above, So yeah, I went through, I was in the ICU. I went through something like, I think the first month after my accident, I went through about 13 surgeries. And I've gone through, now I've had probably about 20 surgeries just over the years. But, surgeries range. I'm about to have a surgery on Monday.
Oh, yeah?
Surgeries range from, the surgery I'm having on Monday is just a scar revision surgery. It should be an hour. I'm looking forward to it because I love being under anesthesia.
I know, me too.
It's like my favorite. I don't drink, so it's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I don't drink either. And I think it was in one of your posts, your Substack, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you were writing about loving going under general anesthetic. And I was like, gosh, I wish I could have a surgery sometime. When I was reading it, I was like, I would love a little general right now.
The best. My favorite is they give you a little bit. They call it like a margarita or something, the nurses. They give you a little bit of something as you're getting wheeled into surgery. And once I get to the hospital in anticipation of these surgeries, I'm just waiting for that.
Yeah.
Like I'm giddy almost. Yeah. And I don't crave alcohol or anything. I really don't miss it. I stopped drinking when I was 20 years old. So it's been a while. But yeah, when I get to have I just literally found out yesterday that I was going to have a surgery on Monday, and I've just been like on cloud nine, which just
something to look forward to in these bleak times.
Exactly. I just would ego death. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So it was life-changing. I really, it's the before and after. Someone was recently talking about the fires here in California. I was reading a celebrity post about losing a part of her property, and she was saying, this delineates the before and after of my life. And I knew exactly what she was talking about, which is there's always going to be a before and there's always going to be an after, and those are going to be two different people, because I don't think you believe that bad things happen to you until they do.
No. And I think it is that, like, for me, and I'm curious how you feel, I remembered that girl. I was the same age as you were when I had my health crisis, and it was very emergency in a similar way, and I was in total shock. And I had a similar thing where people kept telling me how lucky I was to have a second chance at life in the transplant community. That's a big thing. And I also felt really unlucky, and there had to be a death of a physical death of my old liver, but a metaphorical death of who that person was. And it really is, in my mind, a before and after of who I was and who I then had to change into, become, build myself up again from. And I think when you have, especially when you're young, because you think you're so invincible. I really didn't.
Yeah.
I really felt like I could do anything and nothing would happen to me. That death becomes so much more, that change and that delineation is so much more stark. Was that true for you too?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And it's changed how I go through life. I used to be this really, I used to ski a lot as a kid, and I was this daredevil. I would ski at night with friends, which is crazy to me now.
Yeah.
And now, after going through an accident, I think, how did I ever ski? It is terrifying. You get a brain injury. There's people who die skiing all the time. They get paralyzed. Like, I just don't understand how I used to be so flippant about survival. And it comes from, being young and believing I'll text this one person while I'm driving. I'm not going to get hurt. I was dictating emails on the freeway, which now I see how selfish and crazy that is. But at the time I thought, no, I'm not going to hurt anyone. No one's going to hurt me. You really believe you will never be in either position. And so it's not just, I have a saying now when I drive, which is like, I'm not going to hurt anyone and I'm not going to hurt myself. And I say that to calm myself down. And I am a good driver and I'm a very safe driver because of what I went through. But you just see all these possibilities of harm. And I think another thing that you go through, which I really think is a silver lining, is that, and I'm sure a part of the reason for your podcast is you can feel your empathy bone gets stronger.
Absolutely.
You hear something horrible happen to someone and you think, oh my God, like, what can I do to help? Because I can only imagine how scary that is, how alone you must feel, navigating a hospital system. I have a whole new appreciation for that, being in the hospital at all. So it connects you to the rest of the world in a way that I think is very valuable. And when you hear about horrible things happening, you can see it from an individual point of view rather than just, oh, that area is suffering.
Yeah.
So I think there are positives to, and I'm interested to hear your experience, but I do believe that I would never say I'm glad that the accident happened because I went through so much pain. The people I loved went through so much pain, and I won't know what my life would have looked like otherwise. But I'm grateful. I like the person I am with this new empathy, this new level of empathy and this new interest in showing up for people rather than just thinking, oh, bad things happen to other people and that doesn't really have anything to do with me. Now I can see how interconnected we all are and how much again, I don't know about yourself, but so many people that you don't expect reach out to you. in those moments. And it means so much, especially when it's not flippant, when it's really specific. I would have random strangers who would just say, I've been through something like this and you're going to get through it. And I would hold on to that like a life raft. It was very stabilizing to just for moments at a time, at least.
Yeah. I felt exactly the same way. I think I had these like moments of kind of like spiritual awakenings throughout my time in the hospital. And I felt very open and so grateful for what was, even as it was happening, even through multiple surgeries and pain, I felt really grateful. And then as I came more back into my body, I felt it was less clear to me. Like the gratitude piece was less clear.
Oh, 100%.
Because it was like, oh, now I have to actually figure out how to live in this way. But in a global sense, now I'm so grateful for what happened, because even though I have difficult days and I have to deal with any number of things connected to my condition, it has created deeper empathy in me. And I think what it did for me is connect me to the heartbreak of the world in a way that like what you were just describing, with being, rather than thinking, oh, that's just that area that's affected, you do think about it in an individual sense, and not in a like Pollyanna type way, although I have kind of like done that a little bit. And it's been 10 years now since my transplant. Like I've definitely gone in that direction, but more in like a real, like I know what it is to have my heart broken in a way that changed my entire life. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know what you mean too, where the gratitude ebbed. I was in the hospital grateful to be alive, and then I really thought I was going to leave fixed. I really didn't think that I was going to leave with so much recovery ahead of me. And so I definitely just started feeling very angry when I got home from the hospital that my life was going to be different. I hated it.
Yeah. And wanting things to kind of go back to how they were. Yeah. Well, in your Substack, which everyone should read, I'll put it in the show notes, but you write about how your story elicits this look of horror on people's faces, and sometimes pity. And I'm also familiar with these looks. I'm curious, you talk about having more of an empathy just naturally. With that being said, how do you react to those looks and that kind of, let's face it, sometimes like really kind of stupidity in a way,
right?
On people's faces, or just like people not knowing how to react?
Yeah, I think that's it. People don't know how to react. And again, I think I get so excited to meet people who understand. Like when you reached out to me, I was like, oh my, not that I'm happy that anyone has experienced the same levels of pain, but I feel excited for a deep connection that you do not share with people who haven't experienced something like this or haven't had a family member experience something like this. My sister slept next to my bed for so much of the accident, and she definitely has a new appreciation for people who go through pain as well. But yeah, how do I react? I think it still bothers me, to be honest, because I don't like feeling like the subject of shock, or I don't like feeling like this poor person. And I think people can't believe that I'm still having surgeries. And what I want to say is, yeah, it really messed me up. I don't know what else to tell you. But so yeah, it still kind of bothers me when people act so horrified. But I think, again, the silver lining to that is that when people tell me, oh, my wife just got diagnosed with this, or, oh, this person just went through an accident, or for instance, recently, like now it's, my home just got burned down, which is what's happening to plenty of friends of mine in LA. And And I have a new appreciation for, okay, you're feeling alone. You're angry that the world is moving on without recognition every day of the pain you're going through. And you're overwhelmed in a way that so many people will never have to be. And I think that I'm not scared of another person's grief in the way that I think some people have been scared of mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a positive. But yeah, it's so funny. I'm preparing to go on a first date soon. And I'm already in anticipation of, oh my God, they're going to ask me about the accident. And it's such a big part of my life. I'm going to have to tell them that I'm still getting surgeries and they're going to be horrified. I sort of played out. So still not a fan, but I understand. And I'm a little bit gentler with people about it. I used to be really angry with them. And now I'm just kind of like, of course you don't know how to respond. It's a big thing to respond to. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like people just don't know how to respond to grief.
Right.
And have a really hard time with knowing what to say or how to be. And it brings up so much for them about what maybe they're afraid about. And we live in this really reactionary, fast-paced world where, the LA fires were only a couple of weeks ago and it's still very present, but you go on social media and there's like, it doesn't feel like in my world, people have moved on because I'm connected to a lot of people in LA, but there is this sort of like, okay, now there's the next crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. We're upset about, the inauguration now, which is totally fair and understandable. And we should all be upset about it. But there is this, you're right. There's always going to be something new to be shocked and horrified by, unfortunately. Yeah. And I can understand feeling, I remember feeling left in the dust a little bit with my accident. And I can understand anyone feeling that way in this world if something bad happened to them. And I think that's something social media, it's so interesting to me when people put their injuries on social media, because I was so scared of people pitying me that I just started sharing 6.5, almost 7 years after the accident about my accident. And now I'll see people who are having like surgeries post like back in the hospital today or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God, I could never, because I was so scared of you thinking that I was a victim, which of course I was, but I understand that now more so because it's like, yes, you're alone. You want people to remember that you're going through something. You need recognition of your pain. Like I understand all of those motives more.
Yeah, there's something, it's so interesting because I feel like everybody's different, but your impulse to do that was so wise. I did the opposite and I started a blog from my hospital bed and I wrote really high on like sometimes even fentanyl, like really insane.
That's so funny.
Insane impulses to like need to share and to need to just tell people what I was going through. A little bit of that was like kind of managing how many people were checking in on me. Like everybody wanted information and were asking what was going on. And so I felt like, okay, I could do this thing, I could write and people could be updated in that way. But looking back at it, I've like almost done the reverse of the things that I felt so compelled to share about back then. I'm now a little bit like, if I have something going on health wise, I don't share about it as much, cause it's like, I don't know. It just, it transformed for me. And also it's just a different thing now. But
yeah, I think it ebbs and flows. Like now I feel so open about it and will post pictures of myself in the hospital bed and stuff because I think I care less about what people will think about it. And I think at the time I felt so, I just want life to be normal. I had nothing to see here, And now I've sort of accepted, it took me years, but I've sort of accepted like, no, this isn't just a quick thing that happened. This is huge. This is major. This is a part of me. It will always be a part of my story and it'll be a big chapter in my story. I think, I write about it in my Substack, but I was hopeful that this would take a few months out of my life. I had no idea the extent of my injuries and it took me a really long time to accept that. So I think I was hopeful that I wouldn't have to make it a part of my life, but I don't know if you read Between Two Worlds, but yeah. So I'm obsessed with that book, and I just think she's amazing.
Yeah, she's great.
And I love that she did the similar thing. Was it just like, I have to write about this. I have to immediately blog about this, even though I'm kind of between life or death, literally. But I think it's so amazing what she started because of that. And I think that came out of an urgent realization of what she was going through, like you experienced. And I think I was really in denial about that.
Yeah. And she was really young. She was 23. And to be that isolated at that young. Yeah. I don't think there's any one right way to do it, right? That's the other thing. I want to go back to the date that you mentioned.
Oh, right.
I've thought about this so much, and I had this period of time where I was like, okay, I'm going to go on dates and I'm going to tell them straight away, and then they'll know. And then we'll deal with it that way. And I had to get it out straight away. And most of the time when I would say it within even just messaging people on the apps, I would tell them. And for a while, I actually had it on my profile. And it's still a thing that I think about so much going into a first date. But I'm less inclined to be like, okay, you need to know this thing straight away.
Right.
Because then the kind of the horror that shows up for people is colors the whole date, or the not knowing how, or then it just becomes about my illness.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard, right? Because I think we so often, and this is like a tangent on relationships, but I think we so often think of friends loving us one way and our potential partner loving us another way. And I have to remind myself that what I'm looking for is a friend, first and foremost. And so I should hope that they would be sympathetic and you wouldn't change how they felt about me, you know? And one of my best friends, Devin, she would get so angry at me for being insecure about this. She'd be like, who cares that you have a scar on your hand? Would you not date someone because they had a scar on their hand? And, but I am very much like you, where I'm always trying to navigate. How do I talk about this? Because, my therapist put it really well, where she said, dating is all about vulnerability, but you're going to have to be vulnerable even faster than most people. And so I have to kind of accept that. And I have to accept that whoever my dream partner is, my hope is going to have to include that he'll accept me with my scars and my accident. I have to dream that big for a partner, which I think I was hoping I wouldn't have to. And I could just, make someone maybe a little shallow fall in love with me. But it's like, no, I'm going to have to dream about someone who has a bigger capacity to love, unfortunately. Fewer and far between out there, at least in my experience. But I'm willing to hope for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's out there. That's the thing.
Yeah,
it's those people are out there and available. So it just takes maybe some sifting through.
I know, literally sifting through the apps.
So I have this question sort of that ties into this. The way you write in general really hits me deep. I think because you get at this conundrum of having your body change so radically with such truth, with such a piercing truth. And you titled this series of Substack posts, Nothing Was Destroyed. And in part 2, you write, it was no longer one exciting night in the hospital. It was becoming a lifestyle. Now, alone with only my family as visitors, I regressed back into being a child. I cried easily. I despaired over my future. A new fear was born, one that would stay with me for the next 6 years. Who will love me like this? And that's something I've sat with so much over the years. And I remember I had this ex come to visit me early on in my recovery, and I was complaining and feeling really like a lot of self-pity about my scar, and really feeling like no one would love me like this. And with the really radical change to my body, And he just said to me, well, I think it's sexy. And he said it in this very like matter of fact way, like similar to your friend Devin, just like, well, just stop being so neurotic about it. And I really did disagree with him at the time, but it's changed with time. Can you tell me, you kind of touched on it just now, but can you tell me how you're sitting with that feeling today of fear of not being loved from the change to your body?
Yeah, I think it's still there. I think I am not totally confident about my scars, and yet I have really started to see them as a part of me. So I compare it to kind of, I have a really flat chest. I've always been really flat chested. I write about it in my Substack. And I went to rehab for an eating disorder when I was in high school. And when I came out of rehab, I was just really confident. I had done so much work around myself. And so, you know, it wasn't like I was excited to show guys how flat chested I was, but I really recognized it as like, this is just a part of me. And I love myself and I think I'm fantastic. And I'm getting there with my scars where I think this is unusual. You know, my shoulder doesn't look like anyone else's shoulder. My scars don't look like anyone else's scars. My hand doesn't look like anyone else's hand. I can't move things as well, but this is just a part of me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to love myself, I have to love the entirety of that. And I'm starting to feel protective rather than ashamed. So I'm still feeling very vulnerable. I'm still unsure of what my partner is going to look like. And I'm, you know, not an old maid or anything, but in my mid-30s, I'm starting to think of all the different ways to live your life that aren't a part of a nuclear family. So I'm also not attached to the idea of being with one person forever,
Mm-hmm.
too. I don't know. I have, I'm more flexible about how to find happiness, or my ideas on how to find happiness are more flexible. But I am in acceptance of myself, and I'm in hope that someone else will love me this way. And I have enough references to know that's possible. But yeah, it's still a major insecurity. And I kept my hand covered for years. And I didn't have to, but I would say I had to just because it felt, I mean, I would cry in therapy just talking about showing it to other people. And truly, after my last surgery, which was in October, I've just started showing people my hand. And it's not like I'm thinking it's nothing, because it's not nothing. It's a huge scar. I would call it a deformity, which, you know, has such a negative connotation, but it just is what it is. And again, it's just a part of me. It's just a part of my story. It'll never look perfectly normal. And I'm in greater acceptance of that.
Yeah. There's so much I identify with, but it's also just like some of that just has to happen with time.
Unfortunately, I hate that it took so long because there was so much pain involved.
Yeah.
But I also would say that acceptance doesn't mean you love it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't love my scars. I just accept them.
Yeah. No, I'm so with you on that. And I think there's so much toxic positivity in the culture around like, just love yourself. And it's like, I have a hernia where my solar plexus is. And I was in a workout class yesterday and I was like, and it sticks out like, and it feels like a deformity. And I've written a lot about it. And I was in this class and I feel self-conscious about it. And it's like, I can't fucking I can accept my hernia. I do. I've done so much work around it. I've like sat with it. I've had a surgery to fix it. It didn't work, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, acceptance doesn't necessarily mean that I like it or even ever have to love it, but I accept that it's there and it is a part of me, and it's for whatever reason, sticking around.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I keep mentioning your Substack, but I really want people to read it because I love it so much. And I said this to you before we started recording, but you write about this really at times horrific story and in such a hilarious way. And I'm going to read this passage that you wrote. In between laughing with my friends, sobbing uncontrollably over my new disability and getting high on morphine, I, ever the workaholic, also began to tackle some emails and texts. I concentrated through the fog of my click-clack morphine drip. and responded to every single person who had sent the text, "You okay?" even if they were just acquaintances. Depending on how high I was, my texts ranged from "not really, haha, kind of banged up" to "I'm in the hospital because I won't stop farting," or "I heard Lorne Michaels was in the car that hit me." Someone texted me to ask if my boss was safe, forgetting that I was also in the car. So I responded, "He's fine, but I'll never use my left arm again," just to try and transmute some of my pain onto him. So this passage really made me lol like every few sentences. And as I read your story, I said this already, there's so much that's similar. It's totally different circumstances, but I was also 28. You talk about being really into astrology at the time, which I was, and I like really thought it would save me for a minute, and it definitely didn't. I don't know what actually I was thinking about astrology saving me, but
I identify with that.
I also was doing work emails from my hospital bed. I like had my work laptop with me and I was responding, and I felt the need to keep working. And I'm wondering, do you have an idea of what it was for you that made you want to keep working through in this situation where like you really could put down the emails?
Right. It took me a really long time to understand that. I think I was in so much shock about what happened, and I was in so much, I wouldn't even call it denial, because I just really didn't know what a big deal it was going to be. I was ignorant to what had happened to me. I think I thought life was going to go on as normal. And I have a tremendous amount of fear around work, only that I've had, my boss, who I was in the accident with, is really the best person in the world. So it wasn't him, but I grew up working. I've had bosses that have instilled a lot of fear in me. And so I was I'm just a stressed out person when it comes to work. When I think I've messed up in work, I freak out. it's a source of a lot of anxiety for me. And that's connected to a lot of love I have for what I do.
Yeah.
And, appreciation. So it's fine, but I just couldn't relax. It took me until I transferred hospitals, until I got an idea of what my injuries were, until my boss said, "Please stop working."
Mm-hmm.
And people who I was texting were like, "Please do not email us back. We were just emailing to make sure you're okay." People couldn't believe I was just in bed on my phone. And I mean, my phone was literally making me sick because I had a concussion. So I would look at my phone and I would always throw up. But I'm so addicted to my phone, it didn't really stop me. Like I was like, no, I need, okay, let me look at it again. People were literally trying to keep it away from me. So I think it's a little bit of being a workaholic. I think it's a little bit of always being stressed that I'm going to fail at work. And I think it was me thinking life is just going to go on as normal. And I can't let this accident mess me up, this little blip mess me up. And it took me a while to realize, no, this is going to really mess me up. I have no choice,
Yeah, I think it's also like that needing to text everyone back too. That wasn't even necessarily a work thing, but I really felt like I had to text everyone, and I was on my phone the whole time. And I think you put it so succinctly in that, like, it's shocking to be in a situation like that. And it's also your lifeline to the outside world. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And, it's also just how we're raised in terms of this, like, since we were introduced to phones in our early teens, which is when someone texts you, text them back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you don't have the option of really opting out, which I think is something that's a privilege to have, to just be like, you'll reach me when you reach me, because my work depends on, contacts. I think most of our jobs do. So we always have to be in contact. It's so funny. I'm working with someone, and he texted me last night at 10 p.m. to connect on this project. And I was texting with him, and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, by the way, for texting you so late. You don't have to respond." And I was like, that's not an option for me. Of course I will respond. I go to bed next to my phone. I'm never not going to respond. So yeah. It's probably something I will need to work on in the future.
Yeah, I think it's just how we're conditioned. It's a workaholic culture, and it's also work it for me is such a sense, like it helps me to feel more of a sense of self. So it's like, of course I'm going to be glued to my emails whilst I'm dying.
Yeah. Yes. Why I'm literally, blood is like getting cleaned out of my shoulder. I will make sure that this person I had a meeting with once knows I'm okay.
You also write about how your accident felt completely random. And like it was this fun anecdote. And you talked about earlier how you thought you would be going home in a few months, or you would be fine in a few months. And that was really how it felt for me at first. You talk about having balloons and how they morph into monsters. And I had my work also sent me this huge thing of balloons, get well soon, when I was like first in the hospital before we even knew how bad it would be. And so when you write about that, I was like, oh my gosh, they morphed into monsters for me too.
Stop sending the big balloons to everyone.
Yeah, I know. It was really like
they're scary.
They're scary, and also like too much too soon. Like
too much too soon, take up too much room. It's a very sweet gesture, but flowers are fine.
Flowers are good. And at the beginning, it also felt like a party, which is what you describe. And at the beginning, I was cracking jokes and making light of the situation, and then it felt much more like a nightmare. What was that transition for you between the initial shock and like the quote unquote party at the hospital with your friends, and then the quieter task of healing from it?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I didn't have there didn't seem to be a lot of boundaries between the two. So I was very high, joking a lot. It's my nature to joke a lot. And then I remember they initially thought my left arm would never move again, which thankfully was not the case. But I remember them coming in and telling me that I've lost function in my left arm. And I was devastated. And so in front of people, my friends who were visiting, I was just sobbing uncontrollably, and like they were just witnessing one of the worst moments of my life. And then more people would visit, and I would kind of forget what was happening. And so I think I was just so unclear. It was so unreal. I was so in shock. I was in so much denial that I would vacillate between laughing and this is not as serious as it seems. And everyone who came to visit me, for the most part, were in good spirits. I'll never forget a couple of agents from this big agency came to visit me. I think they thought I would be in like a hospital bed with a broken arm and be like, hey guys, yeah, just checking out. The faces, I was laughing so hard because I thought like, this is so funny. My boss saw me topless. Like I did not know how bad it was. And they were two of the first people to visit me. And I didn't know that like my face was swollen because I had hit, I'd flown to one side of the car and I didn't know that half my head was shaved too, or a quarter of my head was shaved. So I looked insane. When I finally saw my reflection in my mirror, I was so upset that people had been seeing me this way. But yeah, so it was sometimes my reaction to being seen was contradictory to how people were seeing me, where I was just like, hi, oh my gosh, isn't this crazy? And people just looked at me like they were going to my funeral. Like it was that, I'm sure you had similar reactions where just people were looking at me with such immense pity, but also shock and just grief. And it was so weird to be seen that way. So it was really between the two, and they kind of blended together. And as it progressed, it became less. There was nothing to joke about. I was devastated. When I got home, I went through the worst depression of my life, as I write about. There was no jokes to be made about my limitations or what had happened. It was just horrible. And so once the shock was gone, once, like I said, I realized it was a lifestyle, I just lost all sense of lightness around it. And I realized that something really serious had happened in my life. And I'm sure, you had this similar realization, because it just descends upon us at one point where we realize like, oh no, this is bad.
Yeah.
It's non-negotiably bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm having flashbacks as you're describing the agents coming to to the hospital because I had this WhatsApp group that I called Liver in La Vida Loca and like was cracking jokes about, I had so many jokes about the liver that weren't even really that funny, but I made so much light of the situation, even in the aftermath of my surgery, and just picturing people's faces as they would come in. And I would keep cracking jokes and they couldn't like hide it. And maybe sometimes if it was a really good friend, they would laugh, but there was a lot of that disconnect. Like there's such a disconnect.
Right.
Yeah. So I really like to talk about death. I named the podcast So Life Wants You Dead.
Right.
And you talk about death being nothing to fear. And I myself have had, I had a few brushes with death throughout my illness.
Yeah.
And you wrote that you look forward to it when it eventually comes for you, not in a dark or suicidal way, but the way, as you write, the way old men look forward to a steam room, which is really funny to me because I really think about death and my experience of it was like sinking into a warm bath.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what you gathered from being close to death and also why you look forward to it now?
Yeah, I had a very weird experience during the accident where when the car was sliding, I was in pain and it hurt, but I understood that it was only going to last for a short period of time. I don't know. This sounds weirdly spiritual, and maybe it is, but it's just how I experienced the accident. And then I remembered feeling really sharp pain against my head. And I remember thinking, if this goes on for longer, I'm going to die. But it wasn't fear. I wasn't afraid or anything. I just knew, okay, I'm close to dying now and I don't want to. And then I screamed and coincidence or not, the car stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're scared of pain and our egos are scared of not existing and like the loss of that. And I think I'm not scared of pain anymore because I understand that shock overrides it. And I think I'm much more scared of emotional pain. I'm betting your experience is similar in that you go through so many painful surgeries, you have so many painful recoveries that pain, when people say this is going to hurt when they draw blood from me or something, I'm like, I promise you it's not. Like, no, it's not going to be close to hurting. It might be uncomfortable, but no, I don't experience that as pain. So I think I'm just not scared of pain anymore. And I think I've been under so many times, and I, as we were discussing, love being under so much that I think the idea of an ego death sounds great. I think being stuck separate from everyone else seems a lot more uncomfortable than feeling one with everyone, which happens to be my personal belief in what happens when we die. It doesn't have to be everyone's, but it's what I think about it. Or I don't, I've collected that from random people. So it's not even like an original thought I have or an intuitive thought I have. It's just what I think, Rob Delaney, who wrote a great book, A Heart That Works.
So good.
So good. But he talks about it like you're a glass of water that gets poured into a body of water. And that's how I really like to think about it.
Yeah.
So
that's how I think about it too.
Yeah, I just don't think there's anything to be scared of there. And from being close to it, I just think that there was a part of me that knew I was going to be okay, but that I didn't want to go through with it yet. So I don't know if you've had a similar experience, but I would have felt terrible for my family had I died, but I wouldn't have been scared for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I don't actually... It's interesting because I don't talk about having these near-death experiences so often, I do on the podcast, but in my day-to-day life, I don't talk about it that much. But when I think about it, it really just felt like a choice. Like it was so close. Like they couldn't actually believe that I managed to stay alive as long as I did with how bad my liver was, the doctors. And I always compare it to this rope that I was hanging on to, and if I lifted one finger, I would go. And I wasn't ready to, and I didn't want to. And I would have been so fine. And I, even in my darker moments, have been like, oh, fuck, man, that would have been so much easier.
Yeah. I 100%. I think it's so funny. I was just saying this to my mom. I live with my mom. She moved back to be with me after the accident, and she helps me with a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to I love you this morning. And I told her, ever since the accident, I'm so clingy. And I think a part of it is just this gratitude I have for still getting more time with all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And as if I let go of them now, I'll lose them forever or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just I understand. It's not even an intellectual understanding. I understand in my gut that I got free time. I got stolen time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, when you talk about ego death too, it's you do experience that ego death with going through something like what you went through. And in my own experience of it, I have clung on to relationships and people in my life more than, I was always really clingy, always.
Yeah. So when it comes to men, I was always. Even my mom, I've always been really clingy to her. So it's fine.
Yeah. But even people that maybe I didn't need to keep clinging on to, I would, held on for dear life in both positive and maybe negative ways. But just this, I think it's I want to say psychotic, but that's not being kind to myself, but just this need and desire to be connected to the people I love.
Oh yeah. I would describe mine, not as psychotic, but as, what's the word? A little manic, I would say.
Manic. That's much kinder.
Yeah.
That's much kinder.
Yeah. A little bit.
Yeah.
Beyond reason, there's something scary about losing them, and it's because we almost did.
Yeah. Yeah. So you also talk about a low point where you experienced suicidal ideation, which I also have had at various points throughout my recovery. There were times where the pain just felt like too much to bear. And your parents at one point decided to reach out to Stephen King, who's also been in a terrible accident. Can you tell me a little bit about that email and what it did for you?
Yeah. I really wanted to die, but I think what I wanted was relief. And I think that's what I wanted more than anything. And I was regressing to a really childlike state, as I said, and I was almost... I really explicitly said this to my mother, I want you to take this away. I want you to turn back time, and I want you to take this away. And I was almost threatening them with my death, as if they didn't shape up and build a time machine, or if they didn't figure out how to get me out of this mess, then I was going to kill myself, which is so crazy, but it's really how I felt. And I think also, a therapist pointed this out to me where she said, you want people to know how much pain you're in.
Mm-hmm.
You just want people to see how much pain you're in, because I do think that brings some relief. I think being seen really brings relief, which is why, I think this podcast is so great and why it was so helpful for me to see other people go through similar things. But yes, Stephen King wrote an email basically saying that you can't avoid resentment and bitterness in your recovery. And that was just a part of it. And that what goes on in your head is none of your business. And that you will someday, your body will miraculously can perform miracles, which was already the case. I'd already, and like you said, doctors were already shocked by what I could do. Just by moving my arm, doctors were shocked. And, that your body was capable, your body and mind were capable of this incredible recovery, and that one day you would look back and your yardstick for pain would be a lot bigger than everyone else's. And so I think what that did to me was, first of all, just just the kindness that someone like him would receive an email from a stranger about their daughter who was in a car accident and think, let me sit down and write a very thoughtful email out. I think that is the amount of empathy we should all strive for.
And it is, you share it on your Substack, and it is so thoughtful and considered. And he even writes a postscript.
Yeah. It's hard, but it will get better. He's so thoughtful, and I'm indebted to him. I actually reached out to him for a work thing years later, and he just wrote back like, I'm glad that I hope that anything I said was helpful. I'm glad if that helped at all. But very off the cuff, just super generous, not at all holier than thou, really just a special person. I had a lot of gratitude for just the kindness, and it also someone who, you know, he himself had described being suicidal after his accident. And he was alive and talking about how you could recover miraculously. And obviously he didn't mean it in a weird, The Secret sort of way, but he meant it more just trust your body and trust your mind, and good things will happen. You will get out of this in better shape than you think, which is certainly the case, despite my scars and despite my limited mobility. But I think it was just reading about someone's testimony to being on the other side of something that was really difficult. And I think that was the most helpful, was meeting people. You know, I had a friend who was an actor who went through chronic pain syndrome, and she was on the other side of it. And when she came over, or when she would text me or anything, it would just be like, thank God I'm hearing from someone who knows how much pain I'm in and is not in that much pain anymore, who has also been through it. It was just, I needed that context so badly. And so I think that him sending that email out of the blue is really a gift.
Yeah, just having someone who's been through it and who can show you what's possible. That it's like,
yeah.
So I was wondering if you would read a passage from your Substack for us.
So I wrote, now I want to write about my recovery. I want to write about crossing the Stephen King threshold. I want to write about the benefits of surviving, the reason that a small part of us fights our instinct to disappear. I want to write about what happens when you come up for air from the silted bottom of the lake, having touched part of the human experience that only the lucky fear. I do not fear it. I have been there.
Thank you for reading that.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me about what made you decide that you were ready to write about it?
It's such a good question. I really don't know what it was besides, well, that's not true. I had a hand surgery that was very successful, and it really helped me feel like I was starting to close the door on the accident. So, yeah, I felt for the first time like it was something really that was in the past, I think. I had always felt stuck in it, like being stuck in amber. You know, just the accident was all around me. There was no after, there was just the accident. And even talking about it, like I said, I still get annoyed with people's reactions, but it has gotten easier. I think I just finally thought of it as something that had happened to me that I was moving on from, and then it was like, I have so much to say about this, you know, which you clearly have as well. And I feel like there's so many, not even lessons from this, because I don't like that word, but there's so much the humanity here, and more so than you get with any other subject, you know. Everyone is going to go through something like this, whether they want to or not. And you know, time steals all. So it's just our turn was earlier than most. And I think you find out so much through this about yourself, about others, about the capacity for love, the capacity for pain, the capacity for heartbreak and grief and anger, you know. And so I, as a writer, I felt just like I have so much I want to say about this, and I finally feel the distance. And it wasn't even like a huge distance. Again, I'm still getting surgeries, but it was enough that I felt like I wasn't writing about the current moment.
Yeah, and what you just said about the capacity to love and humanity and heartbreak. You didn't necessarily use the word heartbreak, but those are the best stories. Those are some of my favorite stories.
Right.
And as a writer, it's such rich experience for mining.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
And also, which you're proving every time I get one of your Substacks in my inbox, you don't write about your accident exclusively, but there's so much comedy in it too, which I really felt from the beginning.
Yeah, there was just there's no way around it. I remember me and my boyfriend at the time, it was like a year after the accident, we were on his couch watching TV, and one of those ads for accident lawyer came up on TV, and it was like, did you know that accidents can be devastating? And we both just looked at each other and laughed. Like, there was just no way around some of it not being funny. And I don't like melodramas or stuff that's too dramatic in terms of movies or books, because I just don't believe that's how life is. And that's not how I've experienced it, where I'm like, there's always levity. It's just unavoidable. And it doesn't mean that what happened wasn't devastating, but it just means that it was in the context of life.
And it was human.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to close out, but I have three questions that I always ask my guests.
Please.
So if you lived in a world that completely catered to your disability, what would that look like?
I love this question. I think it's so, we have to imagine radical care in our society. I think that it would be affordable caretakers. So I'm so lucky to have my mom. And if I didn't, my life would be incredibly difficult. You know, I was just trying to take laundry out of the machine the other day, and I have one working arm. And a lot of people get by with one arm. It's not unusual, but everything is slower. I can't make a bed.
Mm-hmm.
It will take me double the time at least as someone else. And so I think that if I was to get older, I would need someone to help me about the house. And it's not like I couldn't even afford that now, and I'm by no means underprivileged. So I think that we need to have government-covered caretakers. And when you think about, society as we all age too, like, we should all be taken care of, and we should all have dignity in that. We were both lucky to be in major cities as people who were injured. And I can't imagine having not been in one of the best hospitals in the country, coincidentally, So I think that I personally don't understand why, if you want to be a doctor, your school should be free. I really do believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you going to the military, they're going to pay for your college. Why, when you're doing a public service, would they not pay for school? We need more doctors. We need more nurses. They shouldn't be in student debt. I have a family friend who's a pediatrician who's still paying. He's in his 60s and he's still paying student loans. And so I just think that we really need to recognize who is building our society, who is healing our society, rather than just a military state that we're just rewarding those who are tearing things apart and defending things. So I really do believe in just radical caretakers, and caretaking for our caretakers, our nurses. And I believe their kids' schools should be covered, especially because they were on the front lines of the pandemic. They were giving their lives to take care of others. They shouldn't have to worry about student debt. So yeah, that is what I would dare to imagine for our society.
Such a good answer. And nurses are truly angels that walk the earth. Like, just any time that I've been in direct relationship with nurses, it's like the way that they caretake our society, and they're these unsung heroes, because they really are. It's I love that answer of doctors and nurses, and it's a public service that they should have their school covered. Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like, I remember getting bathed by nurses and they bathed me like I would bathe myself, like that intimately. And I was just shocked. I was like, I would never touch a human body like the way you're touching me right now, because I'm not even like someone who's like OCD or anything, but I'm just like, oh, I don't want to touch another naked human.
No, I never would. And the lack of fear and the lack of any kind of mishigas around it, like
100%.
Just like, this is my job and this is what I'm doing and I'm taking care of you in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my next question is, what's one phrase or saying that you always come back to?
One that I really like right now that I've been really reminding myself of is that I don't know what to hope for. So I just feel like we have really set plans and designs for what our life is supposed to look like, what is going to make us happy. And a lot of the times that's not true. And so, for instance, I'm right now sure that if this date doesn't work out, that I'm never going to find love and that I will be single forever. And I have to remind myself of all the times I've been wrong about the guys that I think I should be with, or the work opportunities I should get, or the jobs that I chased after and that I didn't get and were totally fine because I got a better one. So I just have to remind myself that I have a limited imagination. And so I have to trust that there are greater plans for me, or that I can't even imagine what I deserve. Which sounds whatever, maybe woo-woo, but I'm glad that a lot of my smaller dreams didn't work out.
That's so good. That's so good for me to hear in this moment too, because I'm always like, it's not going to work out. And then the things that don't work out are potentially protective in some way.
100%. But the guys that it didn't work out with, oh my God, I'm just so grateful.
Thank God.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
And you need a little bit of time for that, but not even a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, so I'm very, I'm trying to give it up and just be like, I don't know what to hope for. I just hope that we're all okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. And then finally, what's one thing you do to keep yourself creative each day?
I journal every day. Every morning I have a to-do list that I check through, and it's like meditation and I'm not like, I do like a YouTube video of meditation, and I do it from like 3 minutes to 7 minutes. It's not radical, and I'm not a monk at all. But I meditate and I journal 2 pages every day of just, free thought. And it helps me write every day, and it helps get out whatever I'm thinking that I don't realize I'm thinking. And sometimes it's very repetitive, but I do think it's really helpful. It's the one thing I took from the Artist's Way. Yeah,
I took that too for a long time from the Artist's Way. And then last year I was going through I was on steroids, which were making me manic, and I was driving myself crazy. And I was like, I'm going to take a little break. And I've just recently come back to it, and it's such a great. It's also the only thing I took from the Artist's Way, but
yeah, and it's a great thing to take. I think it's. Yeah, I don't even do 3 pages because I know I won't do it regularly, so I only do 2. But good. I love it.
All right. Well, Carolina, thank you so much for being here today. I loved this conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this podcast. As I said, I wish I had it during my accident because I think it's just a really helpful for anyone who is or will go through anything, which hopefully you're spared our situations. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's a noble cause.
Thank you. Yeah. I could talk to you for hours about this. Maybe one day you'll come back.
Yes, that's my dream. I need to go back to New York.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
That was our show, So Life Wants You Dead. This episode was made with support from Stephanie Mo Davis and Ruby Shaw. Our illustrations are by Renee Fagan. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave us a review, rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can find us on Instagram at So Life Wants You Dead, where you can follow along for updates about the show. Thanks so much, and see you next time.